let's start. The formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963 represents the first attempt by African leaders to create a platform for social, political, and economic integration among African countries towards boosting continental cooperation and integration. Many people don't know that AfCFTA have always been in the works. The only issue is that even though it has been in the works, we just are implementing it. And the reason why Africa have Agendas 2063 is because by then AU or OAU will be 100 years old. Between 1963 and 1980, many regional economic communities were created with the intent to integrate regional economy and establish a free trade area. So the first thing African did, or AU did, is to get Africans to create different regional economic blocks. So we have the ECOWAS, we have the SADC, ECOWAS in West Africa, SADC in Southern Africa. We have the COMESA between the East and Southern Africa. We have the Central Africa also. We have the EAC in the Eastern Africa. We also have in the Northern Africa. All these were preparation ahead of what we have today as AfCFTA. These economies were created with the intent to integrate regional economy and establish a free trade area, both as a first step and to establish building blocks for the achievement of a continental free trade area or continental economic community that we have today. There was a Lagos Plan of Action between 1989 and 2000, Economic Development Blueprint for African continent, emphasized the role of intra-African trade for growth for the African continent, for growth and development of the continent, and provided for further development of the regional economic community and eventual convergence of the regional economic community in establishing an African common market. So what we have done now is free trade area. We intend to move on to economic union and then common market. You know, there are different phases in economic integration in any region. The lowest is the free trade area, and that's what we have done now. The next is to move on to custom union, then custom union, then common market. I won't be able to discuss that in detail, but you can check them up online to understand what each of those terms means. And we can even go on to the level of economic union eventually, like the EU, where you have the same currency. Implementation of the recommendation of the plan led to proliferation of the programs and institutions across the continent. Although the Lagos Plan emphasized regional economic development, the regional economic community as a step towards the rising of the African Economic Community, AEC, the regional integration program faltered due to uneven development and lack of progress in many regions, thus slowing down the progress of the continental integration project. A review of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in 1991 noted that very few governments incorporated the objective of the plan into their developmental strategy. However, the review credited the failure in part to failure of the plan to provide an effective monitoring and follow-up mechanism for its implementation, and suggested that this factor may explain why government did not feel obligated to implement it. In effect, effort to revitalize the continental integration project culminated in the formation of the adoption of African Economic Community Treaty, commonly called Abuja Treaty in 1991. So this was why people were accusing Nigeria, when Nigeria refused to sign that, when this program was conceived, it was conceived in Nigeria, in Abuja. So how come you were part of the conception and suddenly you were going to be part of the implementation? That was when Nigeria refused to sign before we signed eventually in 2019. The treaty, which came into force in 1994, highlights a 34-year, 6-stage integration plan for the establishment of African Economic Community by 2028, based on specific milestones and timeline. The stages involve the strengthening of the sectoral cooperation and establishment of a regional free trade area in stage 1 to 3, then continental custom union in stage 4, and then common market in stage 5, and then monetary and economic union in stage 6. So the plan of Africa is to be like EU. Maybe that was why we changed our name from OAU to AU. The plan was to be like EU. Stage 1, 1999, strengthen existing regional economic communities and establish regional economic community in regions where they do not exist. Then, 2007, stabilize tariff and non-tariff barriers, custom duty and internal taxes enforced with REC, develop timetable for gradual removal of tariff and non-tariff to regional, strengthen sectoral integration at regional level in all areas of activity, coordinate and harmonize activity among regional economic communities. Then 2017, establishment of a free trade agreement or area through implementation of the timetable for gradual removal of tariff and non-tariff barrier to intra-community trade, and establish a custom union by adopting a common external tariff within the regional economic community. Then, stage 4, to coordinate and harmonize tariff and non-tariff system among the regional economic communities with a view to establishing a custom union at the continental level by means of adopting a common external tariff. A common external tariff. So what has happened now is that we are currently we have not met up, we have not been able to we are up to date. We have established free trade agreement or free trade area. There is plan now to harmonize the tariff, and that's in the works, but COVID has also slowed that down. By 2023, we have to establish an African common market. You know what common market means? I should be able to pick up my passport and go to Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, Lesotho, anywhere in Africa without visa. Just the way I can go to about 14 countries in West Africa without any visa. Free movement of persons and capital and goods, and establish an African common market through sectoral integration, harmonization of monetary policy, financial and fiscal policy, and free movement of person and right of residence and establishment within the continent. Then stage 6, consolidation and strength of African common market through free movement of people, goods, capital, and services, integrate all sectors, establish a single market and a Pan-African economy with a monetary union. At that time, maybe we'll be thinking of an Afro, like Euro, a currency for the African continent. Set up an African monetary union, establish a single African bank, African Central Bank, create a single African currency, set up a Pan-African parliament, and election for its members by continental universal suffrage, finalize harmonization and coordination of regional economic community, set up African multinational enterprise in all sectors, set up the organs of executive organ of the African economic community. So the idea behind the sequence of the activity is to consolidate the vision of the integration at the regional level through creating and strengthening of the regional economic community, and to harmonize and integrate the regional economic community into African economic community. 3 important developments have stimulated an interest in fast-tracking the integration agenda. First, formation of African Union formation of African Union in 2002 provided stronger impetus to accelerate the continental integration process. Among the objectives of the Union outlined in Article 3 of the Constitutive Act, the AU was established to accelerate the political and socio-economic integration of the continent and promote sustainable development at economic, social, cultural level, as well as integration of African communities. Second, 3 regional economic communities like Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, East African Community, EAC, and Southern African Communities, SADC, signed a tripartite agreement in 2011. The COMESA, EAC, and SADC free trade agreement covers 26 African countries with a combined population of about 530 million and GDP of about 630 billion, amounting to more than half of African GDP. This agreement is viewed as having an effort to galvanize the interest of African policymakers in fast-tracking the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Third, a study commissioned by the jointly by the African Union Commission and Economic Commission for Africa examined the various issues affecting African trade and made a compelling case for fast track of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. The whole of Africa with 1.2 billion population contribute less than 3% of the world trade. But EU with about 450 million people is contributing over 30%, about 33% of world trade. However, about 70% of intra-EU trade is 70% of EU trade is intra-EU, and only about 80% of African trade is in intra-Africa. So we are doing less trade among ourselves. EU is doing more trade among itself, and EU is the largest trading bloc in the world, contributing over $6 trillion out of the about $18 trillion market in the world for international trade. Following this development, at the African Union Summit at Addis Ababa in January 2012, Head of State of AU endorsed the action plan and boosting the African trade and adopted a decision to fast-track the establishment of continental free trade by 2007 through a 4-step roadmap. 1. Finalization of the EAC Commercial Tripartite FTA by 2014, establishment of regional FTA by non-tripartite REC that reflect the preference of the member states 2012-2014, then consolidation of tripartite and FTA and other regional FTA, that's free trade area, into a continental free trade area by 2015 and 16, and then establishment of the continental free trade area by 2017 with the adoption to review the target date according to the progress made.